Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and pleasure of welcoming you to another one of the Society Outreach debates. As you know, many of you who come here on a regular basis, every month Society Outreach has a different topic, and Society Outreach has had debates on the effects of terrorism, the effects of war in the Middle East, the Middle East crisis in Gaza, on Saudi Arabia and Libya, and today Society Outreach's topic for debate is Women Against Violence and Terrorism, Engaging in Dialogue and Diplomacy. There's nobody better, in my view, to chair this event than Rita Payne, and that's not because as a man I refuse to chair it. It's because Rita is better than me, and I'm going to hand over to Rita Payne. I've known Rita for a very, very long time, when she was head of Asia Today in the BBC. She's now the chairman of Commonwealth Journalists Association, and she remains active. In fact, she's probably more busy now than she was when she was paid at the BBC. And that's because she's good, and she gets engaged and gets involved in many topics which are very important to us all. For those who are attending this debate for the first time, Suaad Eltaif, the chair of Society Outreach, and her team work so hard, and I want you to start this debate with a big round of applause to Suaad and I'm just going to, I've got a couple of groups that I'm going to be having meeting outside this room, and I'll come back, but I'll hand you over to Rita Payne.
Thank you very much, Lord Ahmed, for your very generous comments. Until yesterday evening, I was quite relaxed, thinking I would just be in the audience, and then it suddenly transpired that Lord Ahmed has important things to do, and so I've stepped in. Now, it's quite humbling being here with such a distinguished panel. If you get to see their biographies, you realize that each one has a whole wealth of experience on all aspects of women and their issues and their problems and conflict areas. You can go through that. And obviously Suaad, who has been absolutely incredible in getting this panel together, so many thanks to Suaad. Before coming here, in order to prepare, I spoke to various people to try and get the latest figures, facts, to get a picture of what's happening to women around the world. What are the issues? Where are they facing violence, threats? And one of the people I spoke to is a very well-known lady, Urvashi Bhattacharya, who many of you may know, who is very active in promoting women's rights and very, very well known in India. And with some of the notes she sent me, the picture that I got is that it's very difficult to get specific figures for women in conflict and what happens to them. And it's probably because there are so many disappearances, abductions, forced marriages, people forced to become refugees. So it's very difficult even to know if women have died, survived, what are the exact figures. And then, of course, you look at where do women suffer the most, and it seems that one factor, again, as our speakers will tell you in more detail, is they're victims of wars. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that at one stage there are about 19 ongoing wars and conflicts in the world, and that women were among the primary victims in each of these. Rape formed a major part of such conflicts. Domestic violence was on the rise in all conflict-affected areas because the violence of the outside world and the psychological impact on men had brought this into the home and had changed gender relations in a radical way. Today there would be other things to add to this. Mainly, there's the increasing evidence of the active participation of women in conflict. Iraq is a clear example, especially the American women soldiers. But also, for example, there's in Sri Lanka and Nepal, where, again, these are the figures I was given, that nearly 50% of the killers were female. And that's something that maybe you could let me know if that's the idea you have. Then there's also the female jihadi, is not now that unusual a concept. And yes, of course, there are concerns remain. Far from the negotiating table, their participation is marginal. And for the Durvashi, rape hardly ever gets talked about. So that's the bigger picture. Now I will hand over first to Farah Miller, who will now tell you about her experience. Farah is Media Officer and Sri Lanka Program Coordinator, Minority Rights Group International. She's worked as a journalist for several international media organizations, including Reuters and BBC World Service. She's also a commentator for The Independent and Guardian Online. She covered Sri Lanka for more than 10 years, reporting extensively on the conflict with war-torn areas. Since 2004, she has worked in the field of human rights with various organizations, including the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. And as I said, she currently works at Minority Rights Group International as a media officer and covers Sri Lanka for the conflict prevention team. So over to Farah for your views of what you think is sort of the main area where women are actually suffering.
Thank you, Rita. I'd like to start by thanking Suaad and the organizers for inviting me to be part of this panel of experts and to be part of what I hope will be an interesting discussion. Rita, I just need to correct you on a small point. It was the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
What did I say?
Refugees.
I'm sorry, pardon me.
Just sorry to be technical,
but
no,
you need to.
in UN jargon,
yes,
it makes a huge difference. My presentation will draw from my experience as a journalist in Sri Lanka and from my current work in human rights. As a journalist working in a conflict-ridden country, and I should say Sri Lanka is also the country I grew up in, so I grew up in a country that had a terrorist problem and was a conflict-ridden country. I was able to gain first-hand experience on how terror and violence affects women, and equally how women can be targeted by state agents fighting militant groups. In my current work as part of the conflict prevention team in the International Human Rights Organization, I see many recurring themes and repetitive problems. Our organization works specifically with ethnic, religious, cultural minorities and indigenous people, and women from these communities, ranging from East Africa to South Asia to Latin America, face multiple abuses. This is for two reasons, partly because they are from a minority community and also because they are women. So they suffer in a different way to how perhaps women from a majority community would suffer. As I have more experience in how women are affected by wars and conflict, my presentation will focus more on the first half of this topic. In October 2000, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 unanimously acknowledged that civilians, particularly women and children, account for the vast majority of those adversely affected by armed conflicts. I want to start by maybe going into a bit more detail about how women are adversely affected, but I want to make the argument that they are uniquely affected as well. In situations of conflict, and when there are terrorist attacks and there are bombs exploding and shells falling on human beings and on properties, women, like everybody else, like men and children, are killed, they're injured, they face attack. They watch their siblings, their families, their friends getting killed. They lose their homes and they lose their everything that belongs to them. But what's important to note is that women are also specifically targeted in violence and in armed conflict and in terrorism. And they face gender-based violence. Rape is used as a weapon of war. There have been documented cases of this in Bosnia and the Democratic Republic of Congo, amongst several other wars. This is where a warring faction would use rape, just like they would use a bomb or a shell or a gun against their enemy. They would use rape against women as a weapon. The Batwa, or the Pygmy community we work with in the DRC, they continue to report cases of women being raped by Rwandan rebels who are now operating in the DRC, the jungle of DRC. And these women are often raped because they are considered informants who provide information on the rebels to the government. Torture is often also commonly used in situations of conflict, and again, in the case of women, torture takes a completely different nature because it could be sexual in nature. It is also not uncommon for women to have to take on a role as sex slaves in situations of conflict. Sometimes they are coerced into sex work, sometimes they do it voluntarily, sometimes it's often situations like where a woman would have to maybe negotiate for her family to be protected or to find out information about her son who has gone missing, or sometimes to just get food or medicine for her family that's dying in her house.